I never imagined that the biggest scandal in my quiet little corner of Maple Ridge would start with a parking rule. If you told me a few months earlier that an HOA president would lose both his secret side business and the job he'd spent years protecting because of something I happened to notice from my front porch, I probably would have laughed and told you to quit watching so many crime shows. But sometimes the truth doesn't arrive with sirens or headlines. Sometimes it rolls in after midnight inside three black cargo vans while everybody else is asleep. My name is Ethan Carter, and for nearly 12 years I've lived in the same brick ranch house just outside the entrance of Willow Creek Estates, a gated neighborhood of maybe 85 homes. The funny thing is, my property has absolutely nothing to do with their HOA. My mailbox sits on county land. My taxes go to a different district. And the only thing I share with Willow Creek is the view from my porch. Honestly, that's exactly how I liked it. I got all the quiet without anybody measuring my grass or sending me nasty letters because my garbage can stayed outside one extra day. Every evening I'd sit on that porch with a glass of sweet tea, watch people come and go through the stone entrance, wave at neighbors I barely knew, and enjoy the little routine that never seemed to change. Grandparents visiting their grandkids, teenagers sneaking out to grab burgers, delivery drivers coming and going. Nothing exciting ever happened there, even though I wasn't officially part of their community. After a decade of watching life unfold across the street, you start recognizing faces. There was Mrs. Dalton walking her golden retriever every morning at 7 sharp, the Ramirez family whose twin boys were always riding scooters too fast, and old Mr. Jenkins, who somehow managed to wash the same pickup truck every Saturday, whether it looked dirty or not. It was predictable, peaceful, the kind of neighborhood people move into because they think nothing interesting will ever happen. Then one Tuesday morning, I stepped outside to grab my newspaper and noticed something strange. Every mailbox inside Willow Creek had the exact same white flyer sticking out of it. Even from my driveway, I could see the bold red letters. Later that afternoon, my neighbor from inside the neighborhood, Lisa Morgan, walked over carrying one of the flyers with a look that said she couldn't decide whether to laugh or throw it away. "You won't believe what they're doing now," she sighed, handing it to me. Across the top it read, "No street parking after 9 p.m." Underneath, there was a long explanation about emergency vehicle access and public safety, signed by HOA President Richard Holloway. I read it twice before handing it back. "That road's almost 25 feet wide," I said. "You could drive 2 fire trucks through there side by side." Lisa shrugged. "Tell that to Richard. Apparently now every visitor has to leave before 9 or risk getting fined." She rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might disappear. Half the neighborhood thinks this is ridiculous. At first I figured it was just another HOA power trip, the kind you hear about online but never expect to witness up close. Then the fines started. $75 the first offense, $150 after that. Within days, people were complaining everywhere. I overheard conversations at the grocery store, at the gas station, even while grabbing coffee downtown. Parents were frustrated because grandparents couldn't stay late without worrying about where to leave their cars. Teenagers started parking outside the neighborhood and walking home in the dark. Families hosting birthdays or football parties suddenly had guests rushing out before 9, like Cinderella at the ball. It felt less like a safety rule and more like someone wanted the streets empty for reasons nobody could explain. The towing made everything worse. Around 2 in the morning, I'd hear the heavy chains dragging across the pavement, followed by the slow hydraulic groan of another car being loaded onto a flatbed. Those sounds echoed through the neighborhood in a way that almost felt intentional, like a warning to everybody still asleep. After about a week, people stopped questioning the rule out loud. They just accepted it because fighting an HOA usually costs more money than surrendering. That's the thing about people with a little authority. Sometimes they don't even have to convince you they're right. They just have to make resisting inconvenient enough that you give up. I remember sitting on my porch one evening, thinking how strange it was that a neighborhood could go from feeling welcoming to feeling nervous almost overnight. The kids weren't outside as late anymore. Visitors hurried through the gates. Conversations got shorter. Everyone seemed to glance over their shoulders whenever a board member drove by. Looking back now, that should have been my first clue that this parking rule wasn't really about parking at all. I just didn't know it yet. And then, one Friday night, while I was standing on a ladder replacing the motion sensor over my garage around 11:45, I heard the low rumble of diesel engines approaching the entrance. And what I saw next changed everything. 3 matte black cargo vans rolled slowly through the gates like they belonged there. No hesitation, no security guard asking questions, no concern whatsoever about the giant "no overnight parking" signs that had suddenly become sacred law for everyone else. They stopped one after another along the main boulevard, directly beneath the signs Richard Holloway had spent 2 weeks preaching about. I climbed down the ladder, wiped my hands on my jeans, and just stood there watching. The engine stayed running for a minute before 6 men climbed out wearing dark hoodies and work gloves. They weren't talking much. One of them opened the rear doors of the first van, and even from across the street I heard the metallic scrape of something heavy being pulled toward the edge. Then another, large plastic storage containers, heavy cardboard boxes sealed with industrial tape, black equipment cases that looked far too expensive to be hauling around in the middle of the night. They carried everything straight into the Willow Creek clubhouse without turning on more than a couple of lights. It wasn't frantic, but it was efficient, almost rehearsed, like they'd done it dozens of times before. I remember thinking maybe the HOA was storing furniture for some renovation, but then another thought crept into my head. If this was completely legitimate, why do it at midnight? The next evening I happened to glance outside around the same time, and there they were again. Same vans, same routine, same men, same clubhouse. Nobody got ticketed. Nobody got towed. Nobody from the HOA questioned why several commercial vehicles were parked overnight under the very signs residents had been threatened over. That's when my curiosity turned into suspicion. My father spent 30 years as a county building inspector before he retired, and one lesson he drilled into me growing up was simple. People usually hide illegal things in plain sight because nobody expects them to be that bold. By the 4th night, I decided I wasn't going to rely on memory anymore. I pulled my truck into my driveway facing the entrance and switched on the dash camera. It captured the timestamp, the gate, the license plates whenever they came into view, and enough of the unloading to establish exactly what was happening. I wasn't trying to play detective. I wasn't looking for revenge. Honestly, I still hoped there was some perfectly innocent explanation that would make me feel silly for overthinking everything. But every time I replayed the footage, one question kept getting louder in my mind. Why create a parking ban that emptied the streets every night, unless you wanted those streets empty? Saturday afternoon, Lisa wandered over carrying groceries. "You look like you're working on a puzzle," she joked, after seeing me staring at my laptop. I hesitated before asking, "Has anyone mentioned seeing cargo vans coming in after midnight?" She frowned immediately. "Actually, my husband heard them one night. We thought maybe someone was remodeling the clubhouse. Has Richard said anything?" She laughed without humor. "Richard doesn't explain things. Richard announces things." Then she lowered her voice. "You know what's funny? Ever since the parking ban started, nobody hangs around outside after dark anymore. The neighborhood empties by 10. She said it casually, but those words landed harder than she realized. Nobody around to watch. Nobody asking questions. Nobody noticing what happened after midnight. Monday morning, I called the county zoning office. I wasn't expecting much. Bureaucracy usually moves slower than wet cement. A woman answered after a couple of transfers. "County Planning and Zoning. This is Sandra." I explained where I lived, told her I wasn't part of the HOA, and carefully described what I'd been seeing. She listened without interrupting before asking for the subdivision's address. I heard her keyboard clicking for almost 30 seconds. "Interesting," she finally said. "The clubhouse is permitted strictly as a community recreational facility." "Meaning?" I asked. "Meaning it isn't licensed for commercial storage, commercial distribution, or private business operations." I looked back across the street at the stone entrance. "So if somebody's using it like a warehouse..." She didn't let me finish. "If you have evidence..." Email everything you have. That was all she said. No promises. No dramatic reaction. Just facts. I spent the next hour organizing every clip from my dashcam, making sure the timestamps were visible and the sequence made sense. I even added notes identifying each night the bands appeared and approximately how long they stayed. Before hitting send, I sat there for a minute wondering if I was making a mountain out of nothing. Then I remembered the tow trucks, the families getting fined, grandparents rushing home before 9 because Richard claimed the streets had to remain clear for emergencies. If he expected everyone else to follow those rules, he could follow them too. I clicked send. 3 days passed without a word. Life settled back into its routine. The vans continued arriving almost every night, completely unaware that someone outside the neighborhood had started paying attention. Then Friday came. Around 12:15, I heard the familiar diesel engines again, but a few minutes later another sound joined them. Two white county pickup trucks turned onto the entrance road, each with bright reflective decals across the doors. They didn't use flashing lights. They didn't need to. They parked quietly beside the clubhouse while the unloading was still happening. I stepped onto my porch with my coffee and watched what unfolded like it was the final scene of a movie. 4 inspectors climbed out wearing reflective safety vests and carrying clipboards. One of them walked directly toward the open clubhouse doors. The men unloading boxes froze almost instantly. One actually set his container back into the van without saying a word. Seconds later, Richard Holloway burst through the clubhouse entrance wearing loafers and khaki pants, still buttoning a blue dress shirt as if someone had dragged him out of bed. Even from across the street, I could hear his voice rising. There has to be some mistake. This is private property. The lead inspector never raised his voice. He simply pointed toward the open van, then toward the stack of boxes already inside the clubhouse. Richard kept talking, waving his hands, forcing a smile that looked thinner every second. The inspector flipped open a folder, showed him several sheets of paper, then pointed toward the permit information. Richard's shoulders visibly dropped. One of the workers quietly closed the rear doors of his van. Another climbed into the driver's seat without waiting for instructions. Within minutes, all 3 vans pulled away, leaving behind only a handful of county officials documenting everything inside. The silence afterward felt almost louder than the engines had. Over the next week, rumors spread faster than wildfire. Some residents claimed the clubhouse had been used as a private storage hub for an online wholesale operation. Others believed expensive electronics were being distributed from there after hours. A few thought Richard was renting HOA property to a friend for cash without telling the board. I never learned exactly which version was true, and honestly, it didn't matter. What mattered was that whatever had been happening wasn't allowed under the county permit, and somebody had gone through extraordinary effort to keep the streets empty every single night while it happened. Then the emails started hitting homeowners' inboxes. First came an announcement that the overnight parking policy had been suspended pending further review. 2 days later, another message appeared saying every parking fine issued during the previous month would be refunded. There was no apology, no explanation, just a dry statement saying the board had voted to reverse the policy. Richard's name wasn't anywhere on the email. By then, everyone in Willow Creek knew something had gone terribly wrong behind closed doors. They just didn't know the biggest surprise was still coming. The official announcement came the following Monday morning, and if you didn't know what had happened the week before, you'd think it was just another boring HOA email. Effective immediately, Richard Holloway has resigned as president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. An interim board will oversee operations while a replacement is selected. That was it. 2 short sentences. No thank you for your service. No explanation. No mention of county inspectors, cargo vans, or the parking policy that had disappeared almost as quickly as it had arrived. But neighborhoods like Willow Creek have their own way of spreading the truth. People don't need official statements when they spend weeks watching pieces of the puzzle fall into place. Within days, residents were gathering in driveways again instead of rushing inside before dark. Visitors parked along the streets without looking over their shoulders. Kids rode their bikes until sunset. Grandparents stayed for dessert after family dinners. And for the first time in over a month, I didn't hear a single tow truck rumbling through the neighborhood at 2 in the morning. It was amazing how quickly a place could breathe again once fear stopped setting the schedule. About a week later, Lisa walked across the street carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed me one, leaned against my porch railing, and smiled. "You hear the latest?" she asked. I shrugged. "Depends which rumor we're talking about." She laughed. "The board refunded every parking fine. Every single one." "Good," I said quietly. People shouldn't have been punished for following rules that were never really about safety. She studied me for a second before asking, "Can I ask you something?" I nodded. "Did you have anything to do with all this?" For a moment, I considered telling her everything. The late-night videos, the phone call to the county, the emails with timestamps, the inspectors arriving while the vans were still unloading. Instead, I just smiled into my coffee. Let's just say, sometimes all you have to do is let the right people see what's already happening. She laughed again. "Well, whoever did it, they probably saved this neighborhood from a whole lot more than parking tickets." After she left, I sat there watching the entrance the same way I had for years. It looked exactly like it always had. The stone pillars, the black iron gates, the flower beds lining the road. Funny how places can look completely unchanged even after the people running them are gone. I thought about Richard for a while. Honestly, I never hated the man. I barely knew him. What bothered me wasn't his personality. It was the way he'd used authority. Somewhere along the line, he'd convinced himself that because he could make rules, nobody would question why those rules existed. That's a dangerous mindset. Whether you're running an HOA, a company, or anything else, real leadership isn't about seeing how much control you can exercise over other people. It's about earning enough trust that people believe your decisions are actually meant to protect them. Richard forgot that. He counted on everyone accepting inconvenience without asking questions. And for a while, it worked. Families changed their routines. Elderly visitors left early. People paid fines they never should have owed because challenging the system felt harder than complying with it. The irony is almost funny when you think about it. He emptied the streets to hide his own operation, and those empty streets made it easier for one person outside the neighborhood to notice exactly what nobody else could see. If those roads had stayed busy, I probably would have never paid attention to 3 cargo vans slipping through the gates after midnight. Sometimes the cover-up creates the evidence. A month later, I drove past Willow Creek one evening on my way home from the hardware store. Cars lined both sides of the street again. A birthday party was happening somewhere inside the neighborhood. Kids were chasing each other across front yards while adults stood around laughing with paper plates in their hands. It reminded me of the way things used to be before one man's greed quietly changed the atmosphere for everyone else. I smiled to myself, turned up the radio, and kept driving. Every now and then, people ask if I regret getting involved. The answer is no, because I never really got involved. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't threaten anyone. I didn't post angry videos online or start neighborhood drama. I simply documented what I saw, reported it to the people whose job it was to determine whether something was wrong, and stepped back. The facts did the rest. Maybe that's the part that surprises people the most. Justice doesn't always arrive with courtroom speeches or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it shows up wearing a reflective safety vest, carrying a clipboard, and asking a few simple questions that nobody expected to answer. And maybe that's the lesson I carried away from all of this. Power rarely destroys itself because someone stronger comes along. It usually falls apart the moment ordinary people stop looking away. Now I'd love to hear what you think. Did Richard deserve to lose everything over what happened? Or should the county have handled it differently? If you lived in that neighborhood, would you have reported what you saw? Or minded your own business? Share your thoughts in the comments, because stories like this never have just one right answer. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a difficult neighborhood board, or someone who abused a little bit of authority, tell us your story too. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.